Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, at the start of the China-Africa summit in Beijing, President Xi Jinping tells African leaders that China's investments on the continent have no political strings attached. Another $60 billion in new development is pledged, even as Beijing is increasingly criticised over its debt-heavy projects abroad. Also, Britain apologises for the eviction of residents of the disputed Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean. It still insists, though, that Mauritius is wrong to take the dispute over the archipelago's status to the International Court of Justice. And because of Donald Trump's America First trade policy, a clash has been reignited between the US and South Africa. Furious poultry farmers in the African nation are calling on Pretoria to reintroduce tariffs on US poultry. But first, China's president pledged another $60 billion in investment for Africa at the start of the China-Africa summit in Beijing. Between 2000 and 2016, China loaned around $125 billion to the continent, leading to warnings that the debt is unsustainable. President Xi Jinping has dismissed the concerns about a new colonialism and written off the debt for some poorer African nations. The African Union's chief, Moussa Faki, said that Africa's financing needs means it's worth the risk. All nations from the continent were represented at the forum, except for Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland. It's refused to give in to Chinese demands that it ditch its support of Taiwan. Beijing's also vowed to support African security operations. Charles Pellegrin tells us more.
During this China-Africa forum, Beijing has stressed the importance of expanding the areas of cooperation between China and Africa beyond the economic sphere. Or one of those other areas of cooperation is security. And Mahamadou Issoufou, the president of Niger, also happens to be the head of the G5 Sahel group, which brings together the Sahel countries in their fight against terrorism and organized crime. The president of Niger is turning to Beijing to get support in his bid to get long-term UN financing for his joint military force.
We need this joint force to be integrated into the Chapter 7 of the United Nations on Peace. We need it to be financed on the long term. We intend to ask China, which is a permanent member of the Security Council, to support us so that this military force can continue fighting terrorism in the best conditions. Because, as we all know, security is a public good all over the world. What we do in the Sahel, we are doing it for the whole world.
Well, in a sign that Beijing was willing to back his demand, President Xi Jinping, in his opening speech at the forum here in Beijing, said that he supports the Sahel region in their fight against terrorism.
Charles Defois in Beijing. Now, Nigeria is one of the major players at the two-day summit. It is pushing for the Chinese yuan to replace the US dollar in commercial transactions between Abuja and China. It's already begun selling yuan to local traders and businesses. Our Nigeria team reports.
Behind this red fortress is Lagos's Chinatown. The dozens of wholesalers with shops here mainly import textiles. Lulu's overseen the marketplace since it opened in 2005. For Chinatown traders, business has never been better since transactions are now possible in both yuan and nairas.
This measure is all anyone can talk about at the moment within our community in Lagos, because we are aware that this will be beneficial and very useful to everyone. It's going to facilitate ties between our two economies. For us Chinese here, and for Nigerians there in China, it will be easier, faster, and more convenient to place our orders and get what we need.
Funmi Komolafe is checking her order that's arrived from China. She sells children's clothes, and to increase her profits, she looked into trading in yuan. 3 Nigerian banks offer the service, but she found the procedures put in place by the central bank too cumbersome.
You have to apply for a Form M, you have to bring an invoice from there, it has to be goods that some tool that they approve of before you can bring it. So that way, it is not of immense benefits to people in the informal sector.
The National Association of Nigerian Traders strongly backed the currency agreement. For them, it means more electronic transactions between China and Nigeria and better quality control of Chinese imports.
Substandard goods are getting too much. We need to make sure that adulterated goods, fake goods, do not have their ways into this country again.
Nigeria-China trade has grown exponentially over the last few decades, but as Nigerian companies still struggle to find suppliers locally, trade relations remain disproportionately in favour of China.
Britain's apologised for the eviction of residents of the disputed Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean, but insisted that Mauritius is wrong to have taken the dispute over the archipelago's status to the International Court of Justice. Around 2,000 people were forced off the islands in the 1970s to make way for a US military base leased from Britain. Hearings on the case began on Monday. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
Judges at the International Court of Justice in The Hague have been asked to give what is called an advisory opinion on the Chagos Islands. Their opinion will carry weight under international law. In 1965, the UK detached the Chagos archipelago from its colony of Mauritius, and shortly afterwards Mauritius became independent. For decades now, it has been claiming the Chagos Islands.
The choice we were faced with was no choice at all. It was independence on condition of agreement to detachment, or no independence with detachment anyway. This was not and cannot be treated as the freely expressed will of the people of Mauritius.
The UK argues that this case is not for this particular court, that it should be sorted out at a bilateral level. But it did apologise for the way the 2,000 residents were evicted to Mauritius and the Seychelles.
It fully accepts the manner in which the Chagosians were removed from the Chagos archipelago and the way they were treated thereafter was shameful and wrong. And it deeply regrets that fact.
The largest island, Diego Garcia, has been leased to the US, which built an airbase. It has served as a staging ground for US bombing campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the CIA interrogated suspects on the base after 9/11. The judge's ruling in this case may take several months or even years.
There are conflicting reports about a deadly Islamist attack on the Nigerian military. Security sources who asked to remain unnamed have reportedly said that at least 48 troops were killed last Thursday in an attack on a base in Zari village carried out by suspected members of the Islamic State in West Africa. It split from Boko Haram in 2016. An official spokesman for the military, though, has said that there was a firefight but denied that soldiers were killed. In DR Congo, over 24 pro-democracy activists were arrested in Kinshasa on Monday as they protested against controversial voting machines due to be used in elections in December. Pro-democracy movement Lucha says the devices will pave the way for fraud. Demonstrations were also violently broken up in Goma in North Kivu province. And Ugandan MP Bobby Wines claimed that troops fiercely beat him whilst he was in detention last month. The musician turned politician, whose real name is Robert Kyagulanyi, is facing treason charges for allegedly stoning a convoy of President Yoweri Museveni. He was freed on bail last week after days of protests were sparked by his detention. He's currently in the US being treated for the alleged torture. Now, because of his America First trade policy, Donald Trump has reignited a clash with South Africa. Furious poultry farmers are calling on Pretoria to reintroduce tariffs on US poultry. Take a look.
This poultry farm belongs to a white South African farmer, a category Donald Trump recently expressed concern for in a tweet. But its owner is strongly against Trump's cheap poultry exports.
I would like the South African market and the government to put the import tariffs higher so that for us in the market, prices can be better. We can't compete with subsidized chickens from overseas.
South Africa is a beneficiary of America's AGOA policy, which grants some countries duty-free access to US markets. Poultry farmers say Trump's new aluminium tariffs, for example, apply to South Africa, even though they should not under the AGOA agreement. Therefore, they argue it is time to slap tariffs on US poultry once again.
The South African Poultry Association believes that because the US has violated AGOA, it is full within its rights to respond and retaliate. Comes at a very difficult time, especially under President Trump, who has been known to favor a trade war, and we run the risk of possibly being suspended from AGOA ourselves.
Poultry farmers have now filed a lawsuit against the South African government asking it to impose new tariffs. The government is in a difficult position. If it does apply them, South Africa risks retaliation from Washington. There could then be a risk of job losses in other sectors, like the car and wine industries.
And finally, we'll leave you with the sounds of esteemed American pianist Randy Weston. Now, he passed away over the weekend, aged 92. Over his career, he helped advance the link between jazz and African music. He said that for him, the African musical tradition was clearly at the root of the sounds that he made his career. Thanks for watching. That's it for now. Take care.